So now we're going to switch gears to a completely different subject. And in recent years, SaaS is quickly becoming a dominant choice for companies in many spaces. But there is a lot of debate about how SaaS is really changing the high tech. And the question is whether it is about technology or business model or culture. And here we have Chuck DeWitt and Mike Sandler. I'm going to introduce Mike, and then he's going in turn to introduce Chuck, who are going to join us and discuss this issue. So Mike Sandler is the CEO, founder and the CEO of Epiphone Video. So you see here all these absolutely amazing cameras looking at you and videotaping you. So Mike was the one who sponsored us with this camera, generated all this information, and going to share it with us. Thank you, Mike. So exceeding $100 million in revenue and serving over 50,000 customers, Epiphone Video produces world-class, award-winning live video production systems, cloud-based video production solutions, and social media streaming devices. Michael, thank you. And
thank you.
Chuck, we're happy to have you.
Yeah, I hope, it works. Well, let me say a couple of words how I met Chuck first time. It was in Stanford. I took a course for SaaS, BIS-105, and Chuck running that course, and I've been so impressed. I really been waiting every week for that Wednesday to have another one, and half of the time Chuck talking about his experience, and half of the time he invite other people from industry, and I can kind of see the real world and real people who really built the companies in SaaS with SaaS model. And after I finished the course, I kind of feel, I didn't get everything. And I took it again after half year.
Crazy.
Chuck seen me. He said, I've seen you already. What are you doing here? I said, I'm slow. I'm sorry. I need to do it again. And I had one more time. It was a little bit different, not much, but I get much more. I think it's still not enough.
Well, that's another issue.
That's right. That's right. And well, I have a chance to chat with Chuck and introduce Chuck to you. And why don't we start if Chuck can tell a few words about his background and what his experience and how it get to the SaaS.
So I started life as an electronics engineer here in Silicon Valley out of the University of Santa Clara. And my first job was to design part of the Apollo spacecraft, a very small piece. So that gives you a sense of how old I am. I've gravitated from aerospace into semiconductors, and then computers, and then software, and software as a service. Along the way, I moved from engineering to product marketing to sales and sales leadership and general management. After working about 6 years in the technical fields, I went to Stanford Business School and got an MBA in finance. And that gave me a different perspective about how to view companies, specifically how to look at them from a corporate perspective, not just a sales perspective. By the late 90s, I was involved in what we now call my first SaaS deal. We didn't know it was called SaaS at the time. It was called hosted. Some people called it ASP. But by the early 2000s, I could see that was going to be the way of the future. And that's when I committed our firm and myself to that field. And I've been teaching this course at Stanford. It's taught at night to people like yourselves who are running companies on cloud computing, focused on sales, marketing, and finance for the enterprise, for enterprise applications. So that is my perspective. And I can't say much about the consumer side. It's all about helping companies get to large customers.
That was basically your epiphany when you recognized that model would be the future. And what kind of, was it a slow process, or you just immediately get some understanding of the fact that it would be a clear future and for number of approaches? Or was it gradual, or it's just?
Well, what's interesting for me is that the responsibility for success of your product has changed. In the perpetual model, which some we call on-premise, I also call perpetual, the responsibility for success of that offering was largely the customers. And so we see large IT staffs supporting products. And of course, I don't think anyone here has ever worked for a company that had more than enough IT, right? Didn't happen. And my role as a salesperson in those days was sell it, acquire the customer, and move on to the next customer, throw it over the wall to support, and of course support would say, how are we going to do that, right? So this led to long implementation times, a high percentage of failed projects, very high services requirement relative to the license price and things of that nature. Once we moved to subscription models and SaaS, the responsibility for success of the solution in the enterprise space has now largely transitioned to the supplier of the solution. And this presents significant issues relative to business model and culture. It also presents an opportunity. Because that responsibility for success is now largely the vendors, there's also an opportunity to get more value over time. And in fact, we see that happening for SaaS applications over 2, 3, 4 years, getting substantially more revenue through the combinations of length of customer lifetime value and upsell and cross-sell.
Well, can you just kind of say your vision? What more of SaaS? Is it a business model or it's a culture? What's more important? What's kind of initial? What's secondary? Because I'm in transition for company from perpetual model to SaaS, and I have so many difficulties, so many absolutely unknown challenges what I had before.
Right, right. Well, a lot of technology entrepreneurs think that the product is what it's all about, the product features. And so they have this perspective that if I show you my baby, I demo it to you, you'll buy. Well, in the enterprise space, that's not correct. Enterprise executives buy solutions to solve business problems. And so one of the things we say is that you need to develop value propositions and move from featureitis to value for the customer. And this is particularly hard for technology entrepreneurs to do. And value gets represented in terms of revenue improvement, cost reduction, or compliance and control improvement that your solution provides your customer. If you cannot speak in those terms relative to the value of your solution for your customer, you may have a hobby rather than a business.
That basically leads to the question, if we have any transition from software enterprise company to SaaS business model company, what kind of challenges we will see? What kind of transition possible to do?
Right. Well, perhaps some terms are important first. I think of SaaS as the combination of infrastructure, the functional application that collects and crunches the data, and then the reporting that's done typically through a browser and through relevant reports and dashboards. Business models, on the other hand, are the contracting, pricing, and collection practices that your company employs for its SaaS solution. And then culture, in this context, for me, is about how you treat your customers, prioritize your issues, and allocate resources. And it turns out that the cultural impact is huge once we move from the perpetual on-premise model to the subscription model with SaaS today. Did I answer your question?
Yes and no, because, well, I can hear that customer support is supposed to be big value.
Right.
And customer support is very important. Well, I have very good customer support, and I thought transition would be easy, but it doesn't seem it's enough. I think culture of post-sales and culture of innovating, like updating, upgrading, innovating, continuously innovating that, much more existing product, much more important than come up with new version or new products.
So in my opinion, the combination of your great technology, your business model tied together with the right culture can lead to dramatic success for your company. But absent any one of those, and you're risking failure at a much higher rate.
Well, I played with financial numbers and I try to see the impact from moving different numbers a little bit different. I keep watching like 5 years accumulated profit and chasm, how deep I need to go down. And I've been actually surprised that churn, yes, it's affected, but not so much. Most of important part is amount of sales, number of sales, what I can generate.
No, actually, the most important metric in a subscription company is churn, or the inverse of that, which is renewal. In fact, when we look at what we focused on in the old model, it was customer acquisition. A lot of resource went into customer acquisition. Today, in the subscription world, more energy goes into the success of current customers because the financial success of your company is dependent upon the cost of acquiring a new customer, the lifetime value then, and then whether they buy more over time. And so renewal, a low churn rate or a high renewal rate implies a long customer lifetime value because the cost of keeping a current customer is much, much less than the cost of acquiring a new customer.
Yes.
Obviously.
No, that's definitely visible. Over years, and I actually would consider I started this move probably 2 years ago. I'm trying to understand what kind of part of the company I can convert, what kind of part of the company I can build from scratch. And one by one, I see more and more I better to start from scratch in many different aspects. I started with value-added resellers, and seems my current resellers don't understand anything about SaaS and don't want to understand anything. I'm continuing with my sales team, which is definitely very challenging to move from one to another, and they will shoot themselves to the foot if they will try to do both. It's really impossible. Support team, even part of R&D group, and more I'm close to decision to start another company, which is good and bad. From one hand, it's from scratch. I can do different things. I don't inherit on all previous problems, ownership, and I can involve more new people. I can involve new money easily because being 16 years profitable company, I'm not attracted to any VC at all. Obviously, it's absolutely wrong. Starting new company with clear need, that's another story. From one hand, I want to inherit all knowledge and all exposure of old company. From another hand, I really think it will kind of shoot me to the foot.
So this is a dilemma facing companies that have an on-premise product are now trying to move to a SaaS product. And for many of you here, you're in the startup game, so you're not in that boat, but you may have come from the on-premise world, and so you probably understand these issues. If you're a small company, say under $100 million in revenue, all right, relatively small, and you decide you want to transition from a perpetual to a subscription model, from on-premise to SaaS, my suggestion for you is that you have a very limited time in which to do that, a year or less, and it will be highly disruptive to your company because some of your employees will keep trying to do things the old way. The old way being it's all about customer acquisition, support is down in the basement, not a strategic function, but a tactical function, whereas in the subscription model, support must report to the CEO and be run by a high-level executive and looks at things like user analytics on a real-time basis such that they can detect when a customer is becoming unhappy long before the renewal time. Because if all you're doing is waiting for the renewal of the contract and your salesperson calls to get the renewal contract and you hear that they weren't happy or they weren't successful, that's disastrous to your financial results, all right? And so this is one of the issues among many. Consider the issue of engineering. Assume you have 1 hour of engineering to allocate. In the old model, you allocate that hour of engineering to developing a new feature. In the new model, you allocate that hour of engineering to pleasing the customer. And in fact, Rob Bernstein, the CEO of Coupa Software, who is a friend of mine and has been a speaker of my class at Stanford, had a great line. Customer satisfaction is not sufficient. We must ensure customer success. And I like that nuance, all right? Customer success, we don't want satisfied customers. We want successful customers in solving their business problems. Now, if we move on to sales, customer success, customer delight, if you will, starts with the salesperson. So no longer can sales overpromise capabilities of the product, which I have to admit was sometimes a practice in the old model, all right? And so customer success starts right there. That implies a different type of sales culture, if you will. If you look at marketing, marketing no longer can have events around upgrades to the new version because you're doing hundreds of upgrades on a monthly and annual basis. So how does marketing then hold events? And you find things like Marketo doing the road show rocket kinds of events as opposed to around a new release. Marketing also takes on the responsibility for communicating proactively with existing customers to keep them updated to what's going on, to inform them about new features that are coming, to encourage them to upsell and cross-sell along the way. And then if we look at the finance function, revenue has to be recorded ratably over the life of the contract in a subscription model, whereas revenue was all recorded at install time in the old model. This results in valuation of companies declining dramatically if, in fact, they transition from perpetual to subscription. And you can just look at the stock prices of most of the companies who have gone through this. There are a few exceptions like Adobe, but not many. Issues to me are really important, and I think you have to have the combination of the technology, the business model in terms of how you contract and how you get paid, and the culture that you're creating in your companies. And so if you're an early stage company, as many of you are, I suggest to you that this is the time to think about the culture for your companies in terms of how you treat customers, how you prioritize your resources, and so on.
Well, I have another 300-400 questions. Can I ask you last for today? You've seen many transitions from perpetual to SaaS, and what kind of disaster I should anticipate first? What kind of challenges, cultural and philosophical, I should wait like right away?
The biggest challenge I see, or one of the biggest, if you will, for early stage companies is to move from, it's all about my product features, to value for the customer. And in fact, we do quite a bit of work in developing value propositions, which is a process that technical entrepreneurs aren't terribly good at. I like to use the analogy of the people in a startup company are hugging their trees, understanding and working on their day-to-day tactical problems, and what you need is a forest view to help you figure out value for the customer. So when I ask companies, tell me the problems you could solve for your customers, the list is usually long, and then we need to whittle it down to those which are most important to the customer segment now, and which you're most credible on today, because some of that might be visionary for the future, and then what gives you access to executives in your target market segment. And the other challenge that I see for early stage companies is focus, or lack of focus. And so if, for example, you're going to approach markets in a horizontal way, that implies that someone other than your company is going to provide some of the value between you and the end user company. Could be the customer, could be a third party. On the other hand, if you're early stage and you decide you're going to have a vertical approach to a market, and both can be viable, then the implication for me is you're going to have people in sales, marketing, support, and engineering who understand the needs of your customer segment in depth. Now, your ability as an early stage company to assemble several teams of that caliber is not very good, in my view. And so I do see companies saying, well, we're going to go after these three verticals. And if you accept my definition of being vertical, and that is that domain expertise present in all the various departments, then you don't have the ability to assemble that level of domain expertise that's required. And that leads you to what Emergence Capital calls the industry vertical model, which is an entirely different model from, say, the one pursued by companies like Box and some of the other well-known companies. And an interesting aspect here, when we look at the investment capital required for different market entry models, the investment capital, as you know, for companies like Box, Marketo, Salesforce, very large, hundreds of millions of dollars. And the poster child for the industry vertical model is a company called Viva that went public on $7 million. Now, that's probably at the extreme, but it does show you the dramatic difference, and these are choices that all of you have to make as you move forward into your market entry approaches.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have much time yet. If somebody has any questions, check. Okay.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.